Morning had no shape in Ellie's apartment. It arrived like a reluctant sigh through the slits of cheap blinds barely distinguishable from the night before. There was no sunrise here, only a shift in the weight of shadows. The air felt tired. The walls, though painted white, seemed to absorb her weariness. On the floor, crushed cereal pieces and broken crayon stubs created a mosaic of exhaustion. Dull, fragmented, quiet. Her hands trembled as she reached for the electric kettle. Another day, another cup of instant coffee, another hour spent bracing for the next meltdown. Leo hadn't slept through the night in over 3 years. He was awake again before dawn, rocking, grunting softly, his palms pressed flat against the living room window, eyes scanning the street like he was looking for a pattern only he could see. Ellie watched from the doorway, her son, her beautiful, wordless, wild little boy. He was 5 now, small for his age, with a crown of golden curls that always tangled at the back. His eyes were deep and unmapped. Not empty, just far. Autism had taken her by storm. Not the diagnosis itself that came later, but the silence, the isolation, the unraveling of expectations. It was like stepping into a forest without a compass and realizing that the path forward was one she'd have to create. Alone. The days bled into one another. There were therapy sessions and tantrums, grocery deliveries, and bite marks on her sleeves. There were long nights when Leo would bang his head against the mattress for hours, and she would lie next to him, whispering his name like a prayer to a god she no longer believed in. Her studio had turned into a storage room. The canvases stood stacked in the closet like forgotten dreams. Brushes dried stiff in jam jars. Her last painting, half finished, leaned against the radiator, its colors dulled by a year of dust. She hadn't touched it since Leo's 3rd birthday. Since the screaming began. Since she stopped sleeping. Since she stopped being Ellie the artist and became Ellie the reactor, always responding, never creating. Outside, life moved forward. Instagram feeds bloomed with curated motherhood. Coffee shop patios buzzed with weekend plans. Somewhere, her former classmates were still exhibiting their work in Soho. Somewhere, someone else was waking up with choices. Ellie woke up with needs urgent, basic, endless. Feed, clean, calm, defend, repeat. That afternoon, Leo refused to eat again. She had tried everything, textures, colors, even feeding him on the floor beside his puzzle mat. He turned away from every spoonful, eyes wide, arms flailing. By 2 p.m., Ellie was on the kitchen floor holding her breath while Leo screamed from the hallway. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her like a wave made of static. She didn't cry. She just disconnected. Mira, her neighbor, knocked gently on the door around dusk. She was kind older and always smelled like clay and peppermint. She left behind a note and a small paper bag. Inside the bag, a handmade ceramic bird. The note read, "Broken clay still takes shape." M. Ellie placed the bird on the shelf above Leo's books. She didn't believe in signs, but she kept the note. That night the storm rolled in. Real thunder, real lightning. Rain like silver nails against the windows. Leo hated storms. The pressure, the unpredictability, the flickering lights. He began pacing at midnight. Back and forth, back and forth. His humming grew louder. His hands flapped like birds trying to take flight. Ellie stood in the doorway of his room, heart pounding. Please don't let this be one of those nights. But it was. He began slamming his fists against the closet door. Ellie rushed forward, tried to hold him, but he twisted free, his elbow catching her jaw. Pain bloomed instantly, and something inside her snapped. She screamed. A full-body, marrow-deep, no-holding-back scream. Just stop! I can't do this anymore. The room fell still. Leo froze mid-motion, his arms slowly lowering. His eyes, confused, frightened, silent. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She had never yelled like that before. Leo stood still for a moment longer, then sat down on the carpet back against the wall, not rocking, not humming, just quiet, too quiet. Ellie's hands shook as she knelt beside him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "Mommy's just tired. Mommy's just broken." Leo didn't respond. He didn't look at her. She wrapped her arms around him anyway. He let her, and in that moment, with the storm still howling outside, Ellie realized she was no longer mourning the loss of a normal life. She was mourning herself. That morning, as gray light seeped into the apartment, Ellie stepped over a trail of broken crayons scattered across the floor. She moved to clean them but stopped. Something among the clutter caught her eye. A scrap of paper, bent, fingerprint smudged. Leo had drawn something. It was messy, jagged, uncertain. But it was her, a woman with wild hair, dark circles, and arms reaching wide. Next to her, a smaller figure, Leo holding one of those arms. Between them, a blue heart. She covered her mouth and cried. She cried because it was beautiful. She cried because she didn't feel worthy of it. She cried because her son, her nonverbal, non-traditional, perfectly unpredictable son, had seen her. Not the broken version, not the tired caretaker. Her. I'm still someone to him. And maybe, just maybe, she could be someone to herself again. That evening, she sat at the table. She opened the drawer, pulled out an old sketchbook, half empty, flipped to a blank page, and picked up the smallest broken crayon. Blue. The same blue Leo had used. Her hand hesitated, then moved. The line wasn't straight. The form wasn't perfect. But it was honest. She kept drawing. No plan, no judgment, no expectations. Just color. If you've ever felt like a broken crayon and this story spoke to your soul, subscribe to our channel. Your color still matters. Your light is not lost. That night, Ellie placed Leo's drawing on the fridge, right beside a sticky note that read, "Start again, even if it's just with pieces." Ellie didn't expect anything to change after that night, but something did. It wasn't dramatic. There was no revelation, no lightning bolt, just a shift so small, so quiet that she almost missed it. She drew. Just one picture, just one night. But for the first time in years, her hand moved with something other than obligation. It wasn't beautiful, and it wasn't meant to be. It was simply hers. The next day, she drew again. Her sketchbook began to fill, not with masterpieces, but with moment snapshots of the ordinary scene through exhausted, loving eyes. Crumpled pajamas on the floor. Leo's favorite blue cup tipped sideways in the sink. A sunbeam slicing across the living room like a whisper of warmth. She didn't show them to anyone. Not yet. But the act of creating became its own form of oxygen. Leo's routine remained unchanged. He still didn't speak. Still rocked during storms. Still avoided eye contact. But Ellie began to see details she had missed before. The way he reached for certain textures. The hum he made when he touched the color blue. The way he lingered near the window each morning watching shadows stretch across pavement like a language he understood and she didn't. She noticed. And she started sketching those too. One afternoon, as Leo napped on the couch, Ellie stood at the kitchen counter peeling a clementine. The sun slanted through the window, catching on the edge of a glass bowl. It refracted a spectrum onto the white wall. Leo stirred, sat up, and saw the light. He reached for it, tiny fingers against color. Then he smiled. It was the smallest smile, a twitch of recognition, a micro-expression. But Ellie saw it. Felt it. That night she drew the moment, and beside it she wrote, "Color wakes him." Mira knocked again. This time she didn't leave anything behind. She stayed. They sat in silence on the stoop outside the apartment building, each holding a mug of tea. Mira spoke first. "You're painting again." Ellie nodded. "It helps." A pause. "It doesn't fix, but it helps." Mira told her about her own loss. A daughter, Anna, gone too soon. No long stories, just a few sentences spoken slowly like broken glass wrapped in cloth. Clay Mira said had kept her hands from forgetting what life felt like. Ellie understood. Art wasn't about beauty. Not anymore. It was about remembering she was alive. Leo began reaching for crayons again. Not often, not intentionally. But there were moments, fleeting seconds, when his hand drifted toward the box Ellie left on the table. One morning, she placed a sheet of paper in front of him. He didn't touch it, but he didn't push it away either. That was enough. She began introducing colors deliberately. Blue always first. He responded to it with a low hum, soft and even. Then green. Then purple. Red agitated him. Yellow confused him. But blue was safe. One day, he picked up the blue crayon and made a single mark, a curved line. It could have been anything, a river, a cloud, a whisper. But to Ellie, it was a bridge, a way in. She drew beside him, never over his lines, never correcting. They created landscapes of silence, fields of soundless expression. Two artists, each broken in their own way, building something wordless but true, and something softened between them, not in big ways, just in the way he sometimes leaned into her shoulder, or the way he allowed her to brush his hair without flinching, or how he began to sleep with one hand resting on her old sketchbook. Ellie started attending a parent support group for families of neurodivergent children. She didn't speak for the first few sessions, just listened. Listened to mothers talk about meltdowns in grocery stores, about the ache of school evaluations, about the 1,000 small griefs that no one else saw. And one day she brought a drawing, a simple one. It showed a mother and child sitting back to back, surrounded by a swirling cloud of crayon scribbles. Between them, a single thread connected their hearts. She passed it around the circle without saying a word. They understood. A woman named Clara approached her after the meeting. "You should share these," she said. Ellie shook her head. "They're just fragments." Clara smiled gently. "So are we." That evening, Ellie considered creating an online page, just to post a few drawings. But she hesitated. The internet was loud, opinionated, fast. She was none of those things anymore. Instead, she printed one of her sketches and pinned it to the bulletin board outside the community center. It disappeared the next day. She printed another, then another. Soon, others started adding their own. Drawings, poems, notes. The board became a mosaic of quiet resilience. And Ellie became a part of something again. Leo continued to draw in his own way. Shapes, arcs, dots. He never labeled them. But one day he handed Ellie a picture. It showed two figures standing in the rain. One held an umbrella over the other. Ellie's throat tightened. Underneath, in shaky letters, was one word: safe. If this story brings color to the silent parts of your life, consider subscribing to our channel. Healing begins when we realize broken doesn't mean worthless. Ellie kept the picture above her bed. Not for inspiration, but as proof. Proof that progress didn't always come in sentences or milestones. Sometimes it came in crayons, in breath, in presence, in simply not giving up. She began inviting other mothers to her apartment on Saturdays. Nothing formal, no agenda, just tea sketch pads and silence. Some cried, some didn't. Some brought children. Some came alone. They filled the room with fragments of stories, shared glances, and the quiet understanding that came from living in the same storm. Ellie didn't lead. She simply held space, and the space held them. Leo's drawings became more frequent, more expressive, still abstract, still instinctual, but alive. One afternoon, Ellie walked into the living room and found Leo surrounded by sheets of paper, dozens of them. Circles, swirls, blue hearts. She sank to her knees. He looked at her, eyes soft, hands covered in color, and in that moment, Ellie knew he's not broken. Neither am I. We're just building from pieces. The room smelled faintly of turmeric and old paper. Sunlight spilled across the floor in soft golden strokes, illuminating scattered footprints and the broken tips of crayons under the table. Ellie stood quietly by the window watching as two mothers helped their children squeeze blobs of paint onto thick construction paper. There was no noise, only the light shuffling of movement, the occasional laughter, and the steady rhythm of brushes dipping into water. It had been 6 weeks since Ellie opened her Saturday art circle. Not a class, not a therapy group, just a space. A space where mothers of neurodivergent children could sit down without explaining themselves, where art could be messy and healing at the same time, where broken could simply be enough. Ellie never advertised. She didn't even give it a name. But every Saturday they came, sometimes 3, sometimes 8. They came with their fatigue, their hope, their stories hanging on the hems of their coats. They came and sat on pillows. They painted or didn't. They cried or didn't. They were simply allowed to be. Leo usually stayed in his corner, quietly observing. Some days he would draw for 20 minutes, some days he wouldn't touch the paper at all. But something had shifted in him, too. He now approached Ellie with a crayon in hand and placed it gently in her palm before he began to create. It was their silent ritual. Today, he handed her a pale green one. She took it without a word and began sketching a shape, a winding trail, a mother and child walking side by side, backpacks filled with clouds and silence. As her lines took shape, she glanced at Leo's paper. Blue. Always blue. He was drawing a spiral, not chaotic, but rhythmic, centered, like breath. The door opened gently, and Clara stepped in holding a canvas bag and a tired smile. She greeted Ellie with a nod, then moved to sit near the back. A few minutes passed before she leaned over and whispered, "I brought something for you." From the bag she pulled out a folded flyer. On it was a watercolor image of a child holding a cracked crayon. Below it, in clean type, read, "Brooklyn Heals a Community Art Showcase." Clara touched Ellie's arm, her eyes firm but kind. "You should show your work. People need to see it." Ellie hesitated. The thought of stepping back into the spotlight after so long felt dissonant. She had built a quiet life, soft as the colors Leo preferred. Her art wasn't about acclaim anymore, it was about breathing, about witnessing, about staying. But that night, after Leo fell asleep, curled at the foot of the couch, she returned to her old sketchbook and began flipping through pages. Images of heartbreak, survival, and delicate grace met her gaze. Her hands lingered on one particular piece, a drawing of a woman sitting cross-legged, her chest cracked open like a geode, and inside, not blood or bone, but light. She placed it at the top of the pile for the submission box. Maybe she thought just one piece. Maybe that was enough. The following week, Leo came home from school unusually quiet. Ellie noticed the tension in his posture, the way he refused to meet her eyes. She didn't press him. Instead, she waited, gave him space. Then the call came. A teacher explaining gently that during recess another child had mocked Leo for his noises, called him a robot, imitated his flapping hands. Ellie stood frozen in the kitchen, the phone pressed against her ear like ice. Rage was not the first emotion, shame was. Then heartbreak, then helplessness. She hung up and walked into Leo's room. He was sitting under his blanket fort, face buried in a pillow. She knelt beside him, gently placed her hand near his, not touching. "I'm here," she whispered. He didn't move. That night, Ellie stood over her submission folder for the showcase. She removed the drawing, folded it, placed it back into her drawer. Her child was being hurt, seen as different, judged for things beyond his control. The world was not ready. She couldn't offer it her art if it didn't know how to receive her son. She left the folder on her desk untouched. The next morning, Leo placed a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table. His hands were still, his eyes steady. Ellie picked it up and slowly opened it. It was a drawing. 2 figures stood in the middle of a crowd, small, barely distinguishable among the surrounding shadows. One was slightly shorter, the other, taller arms stretched protectively around the smaller one. A blue heart hovered above their heads, and beneath the drawing in letters written slowly, carefully, were 2 words: "You protect." Ellie sat down. Her body went slack with the weight of emotion. This, she realized, was not just art. It was language. It was memory. It was forgiveness. And it was permission. Leo had seen her pain just as she had seen his. They were mirrors. Cracked, yes, but also luminous. That afternoon, she walked to the community center and submitted her original drawing. The one with the mother cracked open light spilling from her chest. On the back, she wrote the words, "Broken doesn't mean finished. Broken means beginning again." The showcase opened on a warm Saturday. The room was filled with laughter and gentle awe. Strangers stood before pieces that bled truth and hope in equal measure. Ellie wandered quietly, watching faces more than frames. When she reached her own piece, she paused. Mira was standing nearby holding a mug of tea. Without a word, she handed Ellie a small gift, an old crayon carefully wrapped in fabric. It was split in two, worn at the ends. Ellie recognized the color, blue. Mira whispered it was Anna's favorite. "I think it's yours now." Ellie nodded, tears burning. Leo approached, then taking her hand in his. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They stood together hand in front of a drawing that told a story bigger than words. A story of breaking. A story of staying. A story of still coloring. If this story reminds you that healing doesn't require perfection, only presence, subscribe to our channel. Because broken crayons still color, and so do you.